So the cash ratio is the final and the strictest of the liquidity ratios we'll look at. It is a hard and fast measure of a business ability to meet its debts in the very near term. It measures serviceability if hypothetically a debt was due in few days time or less, which is obviously much stricter than the 12 months that the current ratio implies. So to meet the current liabilities in this ratio, you only look at cash in the bank and the most liquid investment that can essentially be called on demand. Thus, the ratio measures a business ability to meet current liabilities from all on demand funds within a few days or less. So now to calculate the cash ratio, you have to add the cash and cash equivalent to short-term investment and divide all by the current liabilities. Let's take an example. We have $265,000 of cash and cash equivalent, $94,000 of short-term investments, and $1,217,000 to finally have a cash ratio of 0.28. And now what the result means? So like the previous two liquidity ratios, a cash ratio of say 2 simply means that you can meet your current liabilities 2 times over with your most liquid assets. Or in other words, for every dollar of current liabilities, there are 2 of highly liquid assets to meet these obligations. And what it means if the cash ratio changes. Of all the liquidity ratios, the cash ratio is the one that will change most frequently. This is because cash and short-term investment can consider idle assets, those that are not working hard for the business, and thus they are normally redeployed into more attractive assets from very frequently. You will also find that the reverse can be true and that cash and other highly liquid assets may balloon quickly. For example, after a high value sale or collection, or when other assets are converted to cash to meet ongoing expenses. So this may explain why the cash ratio can be volatile, but underlying this, the same principles as other liquidity ratios still hold, that is, the higher the ratio, the better. So in short, the underlying theory it is that if the cash ratio is increasing, then highly liquid assets are building up on the balance sheet in respect to current liabilities, which in turn means the ability of a business to meet its obligations when the fall due is improving. As for the flip side, if the cash ratio is falling, then there is increased uncertainty on how it will meet its short-term debts without undergoing asset restructures or conversions. So finally, with the drawbacks of the cash ratio, the strongest one is that it can be volatile and may actually be just a measure of cash that is currently in the bank and not really a measure of how capable a business is able to pay its debts. Because increased liquidity normally results in lower returns for an asset. Many businesses simply keep the bare minimum in cash and short-term investments. The rest is in inventory or higher returning assets. Only when a debt actually becomes due are the other assets liquidated to meet the payment. Therefore, for example, a business may have a terrible cash ratio for 27 days in a month, but be very capable of turning assets into cash to meet their debts for the last days of the month. When the debts are actually due in situations like this, you can see why the cash ratio wouldn't be very helpful if relying on this measure during those first 27 days. And further along this point, unless you know the inner workings of the business you are studying or what day should you calculate the cash ratio, the figure may be drastically different on each day of the month, let alone the quarter or year, which is the true figures. Unless you measure the figure daily, hourly, etc., and then take an average, you may never know the true figure.